Good evening and welcome to our Antioch homecoming. I'm so glad you guys could join us. It is just an honor and a blessing to be here with the community, with Fairfield Foundation family. You guys are certainly like family. It's just a wonderful relationship that we have. And so I want to welcome you to the historic Antioch Church. We are blessed to steward this, which is, the only historic building in this Pine Swamp region. And so this will be the hub for all types of stuff that we do, and we're excited about that. And so I hope you were welcomed by elders and leaders and others here. I hope you enjoyed some fellowship. We'll have some time for fellowship afterwards as well. But we will open up with a word of prayer, and then we're going to bring up, we've got two speakers tonight. I'm excited about them. Then we're going to have a praise dance, and then I will facilitate a healing circle. I'll introduce it while we're online, but then we're going to get offline, you guys on Zoom or broadcast, because we're going to have a safe space for the healing circle. But at least you'll get to start the beginning with us. And so let us go before the Lord in prayer, and then we'll jump right in. Father, we just thank you for community, because you're the one who brings us together. We ask for your grace upon the Antioch homecoming and upon all of the organizations represented here. We thank you for what you've done in this community historically and what you want to do going forward. And so we invite your presence and invite you to have your way. B'Shem Yeshua HaMashiach. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, so we're going to welcome up our first speaker. She's going to come and tell us a lot of history. We've got some history coming forth, so it lets us know why we're here.
First thing I'm going to do is set a timer for myself so I can make sure I can keep pace. But hello everyone, my name is Sarah Edwards. I am an archaeologist with the Fairfield Foundation, but what I'm speaking about today is actually some of the stuff I had done prior to working for the Fairfield Foundation. So that's going to be about broadly church landscapes. So what kind of churches are in a community and how we can use these churches to learn about enslaved communities, all right? So I always enjoy having a bit of a roadmap whenever I hear presentations. So just so you know, I am going to give a very brief introduction. Then I want to talk for the bulk of this time about a project I did while I was getting my master's at UNC Charlotte. And then I feel like it wouldn't be right to not try to connect that in some way to Gloucester and surrounding areas. So a little bit about me. Like I said, my name is Sarah Edwards. Right now I am an archaeologist with the Fairfield Foundation. But in December I graduated from UNC Charlotte. I got my master's in anthropology and archaeology, which helps me with the job that I'm doing now. But I also got my master's in a program called Critical Heritage Studies, which is just, it's a bunch of mumbo-jumbo for basically, I look at people's heritage and I study it and I learn how to talk about it and how to listen to what is important to other people and how to mitigate when there's conflicts in heritage and all those kinds of things. And it's through that program that I met a woman named Dr. Julia Moore, and she had a project called the Pathways to Peace project that I worked with her with. That Pathways to Peace project is sometimes in other pieces of media called the Equity, Memory, and Memorial Project. Unfortunately, because of a lot of issues with DEI policies, because of the word equity, we did have to change the name of the project, and we lost a little bit of funding because of it, so that was a little bit frustrating. But we're back to it with Pathways to Peace. And I worked on that for 2 years with her and another master's student. Now, the problem with studying enslaved history, there's a lot of issues and difficulties that come with it. One of the main issues is a lack of archive and a lack of records. Sometimes the only pieces of information we have about enslaved communities are coming from the archaeology, like the stuff that we do at Fairfield, for example, right? But unfortunately, there are very limited records that exist that, one, talk about the system of slavery, but in particular talk about the individuals. It's so hard to find names of people, to find anything about the individual's personality and identity and livelihood. That is a big mystery, right? Especially if you take into consideration that all around the South there's burned counties where all of these records are threatened and we're missing a lot of them, okay? Now, we use churches in Charlotte to fix this problem, but in order to understand that, I do have to go through a bit of history. So Charlotte, in case you didn't know, North Carolina, it was settled by Scotch-Irish settlers, and they have predominantly Presbyterian faith, okay? So they came to Mecklenburg County, which is where Charlotte is, and they set up what are now known as the 7 sister churches in the colonial era. And they literally, actually you can see it in the next slide, form a circle around Charlotte with one in the center. I apologize for the colors here. This is pulled off of a different document here, but you can see this perfect circle around Charlotte with one in the center. You'll also see some orange colors in there. Those are churches that technically aren't the Seven Sisters, but they broke away from those Seven Sisters so early on that they have extremely similar histories. Now, you have to remember that yes, churches are centers for religious experiences, but it's also a community hub, okay? So Charlotte is literally formed around these churches. Everything was happening through those churches. They were community centers, they were places for moral and ethical conversations, and for the plantations that existed around the area, they were extremely tied into all of these. What you should know is that in Presbyterian churches in the past, it wasn't just white congregants. It was enslaved congregants as well. I don't want to use the word allowed here. They weren't allowed to attend because sometimes they were forced to attend. But in other times, being able to attend these churches was a form of agency for enslaved people. They would go to these churches and had a chance to have some kind of movement within their own social systems, all right? So they would go to these Presbyterian churches and they would attend services, and sometimes they would become members. Now, they weren't necessarily the same kind of members that the white congregants were. A lot of times they actually had to sit in different areas of the church entirely. That's what this picture is here on the right. This right here is a picture of a slave gallery, which is up in the back of a church, where that's the only place that enslaved people were allowed to watch services. Other times they had to sit on the outside and put their ear up to listen, okay? But either way, they were technically members. Let's see. Now, I'll get back to that in a second. The other thing you have to know about Charlotte history is after emancipation, those 7 sister churches and those 4 other ones, after emancipation, those formerly enslaved congregants broke off to form 14 really important black churches around Charlotte, okay? And most of them are still there in some form today, maybe changing names, changing locations, but I'll show you another picture here. All of these, again, around Charlotte are what those churches are now. And I can show you at the end, if I have extra time, a map that shows exactly which historically black churches come from which of the 7 sister churches, right? Now that's really important because that means that historically, the black community members associated with these churches, we can directly trace their ancestry to these 7 sister churches. And it means that there's these connection points between the black community in Charlotte and these other churches, okay? That's also important because Presbyterians are known for their record keeping. I mean, a lot of churches are, you see vestry records all the time, but the Presbyterians in particular, they would have vital records, right? So they're keeping track of death, birth, baptism, all those kinds of things. You also see in there they were keeping tabs, because remember, it's not just a religious center, it is a place for all community information. So because of that, that means that they have maps and they're keeping track of who's landowners around here. They're keeping track of land contributions, financial contributions, all those sorts of information. But what I find the most important for this project is that they have, the Presbyterians have what are called a session of elders, okay? They are high-ranking, not only in the church, but also the community in general. They tend to be wealthier and hold a lot of power, white males predominantly. And these sessions of elders would hold meetings where all the members would have to attend. And that's where they would come through with not only religious information, but ethical and moral quandaries as well. So if an enslaved person who is a congregant of this church, if something happens that they think is deserving of punishment, they actually have to go in front of a session of elders first. And they write down every bit of information that comes through that church. And so suddenly, we have all these records that are still today sitting inside these 7 sister churches that not only have a bunch of information about the enslavers and the wealthy people, but it's one of the only sources that we have of enslaved people, and it has names, it talks about their livelihoods, what their day-to-day life is like, even sometimes gets into a little bit about their personality. Not always, you can only tell a little bit at a time. So yeah, like I said, includes enslaved congregants, extremely important, right? So, with that information, what Pathways of Peace did, and is still doing, it's still an active project, we really worked to kind of bridge this gap between those 7 sister churches, and those other 4 that are really important, and the 14 historically Black churches, right? So that means that we're sharing information between the 2. Anything that we find out in the archives of the 7 sister churches, we're sharing it with those, the Black community members as well. But we're also doing a lot of racial healing in one way or another, right? So there's communications going on between them about what the legacy of slavery looks like and how it impacts them. It's giving the Black community access to the spaces that are still on the land of those 7 sister churches, you know, so that they can have a connection to where their ancestors occupied space. We went through a lot of different methods in order to succeed in this goal, but what I break down as kind of the 4 main things is first, we go back to that archival research. So we are pouring through those archives, paper through paper through paper, to keep track of all this information, to find out names of the enslaved, to find out anything that we can that might be an important source of information, not just for learning about the legacy of slavery as a whole, but also to take that information back to possible descendants so that they have a connection to who they're related to, okay? That also means sometimes we're digitizing it. Actually, I think, yeah, I have another slide here. So we're also digitizing it. And I think I have an example here. Yeah, so this is an example of, I think this one's from Sardis Presbyterian Church. This is what an example of those session minutes look like. Kind of messy to read, but you kind of get used to it after a while. So we take pages upon pages. I mean, these are books for every single church. And then we digitize it into a spreadsheet that's searchable, right? It's a little bit messy at this point, but this is just an example. All the names in red are people. And a lot of them are what they refer to as servants, but as we know today, those were the enslaved people. And all of this information, we then can make sure it's given to the right people, and then, once again, put in kind of a more digestible way, right? So sometimes we're making story maps, documentary was made. We are directly connecting these names and making sure it's going to the right descendants. With memorialization, as I told you, the original name was Equity, Memory, and Memorial. We want to make sure that this information kind of makes its mark on the landscape in one way or another, that there's an actual physical footprint. Sometimes that's making a plaque. You can see this example here is one that's marking an enslaved cemetery at one of these churches. There's also such thing as remembrance structures. So for example, this one's Hearth, which is a memorial to the enslaved people associated with William and Mary. These are physical structures that you interact with. The Fairfield Foundation has ghost structures of enslaved quarters that force whoever's there to look at the enslaved history, to interact with it. It's quite literally a physical footprint on the landscape that you cannot miss. You have to confront it. For us, one of the things that we got funding for is we teamed up with architect. We teamed up with an architect named Mark Knapp, and he has designed a big structure, a memorial, that when you walk into the space, there's a bench, and it's really dark in there. And there's holes through the ceiling that cast a shadow down. And these little pockets of light each represent a grave that was found in GPR, so ground penetrating radar, that was found on one of the church properties. So when you're sitting in there, and it's a place for reflection, sometimes for connection, for descendants, you get to see every single piece of light was an enslaved person who was buried on that property. The other thing you might have are reinforcements of collective memory. You might recognize the church up there, that's Antioch, because this is one of those examples, right? So times where people are communicating and meeting and talking about history. For us, that's exactly what we're doing now. For this project, it's making sure we're bringing Black community members together to share stories, to reinforce ideas of what the legacy of slavery has done, and to help move along racial healing. The one thing I haven't mentioned, or I've only touched on a little bit, is enslaved burial spaces, because because this is kind of a heavier topic. But around here, I think for the most part, a lot of enslaved people are buried on the plantations where they lived the majority of their lives. In Charlotte, a lot of the enslaved people are buried at these churches. However, they were not given the same resources a lot of times as the white cemetery. So they're a lot of times kind of pushed away to the edges of the property. They weren't walled off. They don't have real, I shouldn't say real, because it is very real. They don't have the typical structured headstones that we think of. Instead, they were using field stones and pieces of wood and brick and shell and glass and anything they could possibly do to mark the graves of their loved ones. They a lot of times had to go dig graves in the middle of the night. And you can imagine over time what happens is these graves get almost forgotten. A lot of people remember that they're around, especially descendants. They have connection to the space, but they don't know where their ancestors exactly are buried. They become just a part of the woods and the landscape around it. The example that I have for you is Sardis Presbyterian, one of those 4 orange churches that I had showed you. Now, it's a 1790s church, and there are 3 cemeteries. I'll show you a map here. You can see, this is their modern cemetery. Can you see my cursor? Yeah. You can see this modern cemetery here. That's where they bury people today. You can see this right here. This square is the historic walled cemetery because their old original church actually was right here. So this is where the white people were buried. Now, right in this area here is an enslaved cemetery. One thing I noticed when I was walking the land, though, is that it's small. We know that there were a lot of enslaved people associated with this church, and there's no way they all fit in this space. So what I did is I asked Dr. Moore if she could get me permission to walk the land. And I did. And I walked, I took 3 visits, and I walked all through here. One of the things that I'm trained to do is to identify unmarked graves. So 3 site visits, I walked around the cemetery, and I marked field stones that were hidden under vegetation. I marked undulations. I marked different kind of stone groupings and found almost like grids of these field stones. You can see that here. And then I mapped them out. And what I found was that these 5 large clusters of what looked to me like enslaved burials. I counted 73 in total, all around, that were not identified in any way. Nobody knew was back there. I am happy to say we secured some funding to, some of the areas are going to be GPR'd, some other ones aren't very accessible, so they're going to go ahead and memorialize and maintain it as if we knew for a fact that enslaved people were there. The last thing that we have to do, it's really important, is work on stakeholder empowerment. If you don't know what stakeholder means, it just means that the people who have some kind of connection to this project in some way. Sometimes that's descendants. We tend to put a lot of focus on the descendants because they are really important, because connecting to your own heritage is really important, and it's what it means to be human. That also means sometimes anybody who's associated with these churches. Sometimes the people who care about historic preservation and just want to tell people's stories. There's all kinds of stakeholders that are out there. Either way, this project is really centered on making sure that those stakeholders are heard, we hear their voices, and that they have the power to do something about the information, right? So that is hosting those meetings. It is making those making memorials. It's creating sacred spaces for them where they can sit, reflect, interact with the landscape that their enslaved ancestors occupied. I'm going to show you here, I'm doing okay on time, so I'm going to show you here just one example. If I can, hold on one second, of a story map. I don't know if any of you are familiar with story maps, but we shared this one in particular with, I think, 3 of the historically Black churches that they can, they've put up on their website, so the community members in the church can learn about their own history. I don't know if it's, I might not be able to do this right now. Either way, a story map is this, it's kind of like making a website, and if you're able to create a narrative about history that's extremely accessible to the average reader, right? So it's made in a way that's really approachable, really easily digestible. You can read through a story map really easily and understand the who, what, when, where, why. There's interactive maps. For example, those maps that I showed you earlier with the churches, you can interact with that and click on each one to learn about all the churches. You can click to see this one historically Black church, which churches did they originate from? which people associated with that church could I possibly be related to? And it's one of the ways that they can easily interact with your own history and tell it in a way that's not super jargony, it's not hidden in research language, it's accessible, which is important. Now, I do want to talk and touch a little bit about Gloucester. Admittedly, I haven't done research on this in Gloucester, just in Charlotte. But that doesn't mean that something like this can't be done by me or by someone else. Because the truth is I lost my funding for this project because of the word equity. And so I didn't do any of this for pay. I did it because I care about it, because Charlotte was suffering, because Charlotte has so much deep and rich history that people were unable to connect to, because none of this has been happening. All those records were hidden in the church and nobody had gone in and searched this level and made it accessible, right? So I would love to do something like this in Gloucester, but I have to start first. And there's some really key questions that we have to answer before even starting. First of all, I would have to know how many churches in Gloucester were here pre-emancipation, okay? Those that are still standing, those that aren't still standing, those that might have some kind of record of it. I would want to know a little bit about the dominant denominations, right? Because Presbyterians, one of the things that really advantageous is the fact that they were such good record keepers and that they had those session of elders. So I would need to know which denominations have something similar, and then which of these churches, if any, had enslaved congregants connected to them in some way, right? Or enslaved people, they don't even have to be congregants. But which of these, and in what way, have enslaved people interacting with it? Some other key questions to address. We would have to know, again, to what extent were enslaved people involved in the churches, whether attending or in some way building or interacting with. What kinds of records pertaining to the enslaved who are interacting with that building, what kind of records would be in that church? And are they still accessible today? Are they in an archive somewhere? We want to know, too, to take it a step further, just like those 14 historically black churches in Charlotte, what is the connection between the historically black churches in Gloucester to these pre-emancipation churches? You know, is there a clear descendant line? Maybe there's not. Maybe there is something, you can think of descent by common heritage, meaning they're not biological descendants, but what it means to be a black American means that slavery and the legacy of slavery still impacts them, right? So understanding the history of these black churches is still equally as important, even if it's not their actual biological descendants. And then most importantly, if we did collaboration between these colonial churches, or not colonial, pre-emancipation churches in Gloucester, and the historically black churches in Gloucester, would there be a benefit? Does the community want that? And if so, what exactly do they want out of it? Because none of this means anything if it's not going to help anybody. Research for the sake of research is not helpful. It has to cause something good. Goals with that would be understanding broadly more about the history of the enslaved in Gloucester. More importantly, though, not just the system, it would be really fantastic to find more about the individual, finding names, because names are really powerful. They have legacy and power just by saying their name. It would be to find out about daily life, what things were impacting them, what kind of struggles they had, what were they doing to make, to find joy in their life, to find agency and power in their life. You can find those kinds of things in archives. In general, all of those things, in theory, hopefully, could facilitate racial healing in Gloucester. Because the legacy of slavery doesn't go away. It's here. Racial healing is something that always needs to happen, and it needs to happen actively. It needs to be in action. With that, again, to facilitate racial healing, having opportunities for memory, memorial, reflective spaces, sacred spaces, so carving out something physical in the landscape that marks that enslaved people were here, that their descendants are here, that there are stakeholders here. Putting a mark on the landscape so you can't look away is really important. And then finally, connecting descendants, biological descendants, but also perhaps descent by common heritage. Connecting those descendants and other community members with this key information. So making sure whatever we are finding out is digestible, perhaps through a story map or through Pathways to Peace. We did a documentary that was really wonderful. We have tons of community meetings and lectures, kind of like I'm doing now, to make sure people are connected. That would be another really great goal, all right? Now, as much as I would love to be able to do all this kind of stuff on my own, one of the things that made Pathways to be so successful was that Dr. Moore, she had great connections to the community. And that's hard, to be able to reach out to multiple community members and make sure you're helping as many people, but also hearing as many people as possible, okay? So what that means, I put my contact information on the bottom. I would love to hear from anybody who cares and has anything to say. That could be for recommendations, things that they want me to look at, or they want to look at themselves. It could be connecting me with resources and information. It could be reaching out to me about concerns. You know, maybe you're concerned that I'm going to be missing something, or that I didn't mention a way that I could help the community. Maybe it's giving me guidance and ideas on how to move forward and how to do it respectfully. That's all valid, and I would love to hear anything I possibly could. And with that, I do give my many thanks to all of you for listening, and feel free, if you need to take a picture of my email or anything like that, you're more than welcome to. So thank you. Oh, let me grab my water. Did I leave my water?
Well, let's give her another hand. I really enjoyed that presentation, and I'm so glad that Dr. David Brown is going to follow you, because he can actually share specifically from Fairfield what Fairfield is doing, you know, how to connect that connection between the pre-emancipation churches and the African American churches in the region. So, you know, I'm just excited to hear his presentation. So we're going to welcome him to come up right now.
You gotta make magic happen.
I thought you wanted to.
It's a blue screen, not the white screen of death that everyone's every time our occasional website ends up giving us a frightening blank screen. This one is going to be a lot easier. Oh, that's nice. We can talk about that for a while.
Yes.
That's the sound of a young man who's anxious for a vacation. All right, thank you so much. Oh, fantastic. That's all I need. All right, so that was a wonderful presentation. That was something that's, it is fun to be able to lose yourself and just listen to someone who's able to kind of communicate something that is both interesting, but also you can tell the passion that they have for it. For me, it's a wonderful segue, because I was constantly thinking like, oh yes, okay, yes, that's amazing. I'm going to try to build a little bit off of what Sarah has presented. I am digging deep into the archives in a sense, because what you're going to hear about today is based on research that we started essentially the year or two after we started work at Fairfield. Fairfield's been in existence as an organization, Fairfield Foundation, since 2000. And we were really brought to the site because of a man who remembered a very simple story that was passed to him by his grandfather. The man's name was Cecil Ray Page Jr. And he had heard the story from his father, who was Cecil Ray Page Sr., as one should expect. And it was a story that Sr. had remembered because he experienced it, because he was 10 years old in 1897. So that's already getting back a far distance. He remembered walking up to the front porch of the building that you see on the screen. It's a very strange kind of oral history because it is from a 10-year-old, but he remembers certain key things that inspired us, as so many things do when it's material culture, when it's the vision that you have from someone who is young and understanding their lives. He walked up to the front porch of the house, and tied to the porch was a chicken, which is already kind of something we're not commonly exposed to. It's not something we see like, oh yes, just like the chicken tied to my porch at home. That's just not, it's kind of lost in most of us who grew up in the suburbs, particularly if you look like me. So he walks up to the front porch and he goes inside. And in the room that he enters into, there is an African-American woman sitting on a piano stool. Like, okay. Next to her is a pile of corn cobs. And she's feeding those corn cobs into the stove. And then next to her is a piano. And tied to the piano is another chicken. And that's it. It's one of the weirdest little blurbs that I was like, how did you remember that? You know, what was it that made that so impressive or interesting or stick out in your mind? I mean, none of us can really we can't always explain why we remember things. But that was transformative for us to hear. We knew it was important. We eventually got our friend Ray Page Jr. to actually record it, so if I was truly prepared, I would be playing you the audio file and he would be telling you that story. But it was one of those, in our ways, kind of quirky moments that built a sense of a mystery for what was in the past. It built a sense of foreignness because it was complicated with all of these things that we didn't understand. It set a bar for us to not judge because we immediately saw this connection between the material culture for this site that we were beginning to excavate and this desire to kind of join everyone in this journey to understand better that moment. It's also the late 19th century. In Virginia, one of the most understudied aspects of our history are African American women in the late 19th century, particularly in rural contexts. One of our earliest interns was researching that subject, and her whole project was, tell me what's been written on it. And months of research. She was an undergrad at Sweetbriar College, produced essentially like a couple of scholarly published articles. The books all dealt with free communities or recently freed people and their influence mostly in urban areas. And so we thought, okay, well maybe this is also an area we could contribute through research. We could start to talk about those people and their lives. And ultimately what it brought us to is the same thing that Sarah was pointing out, a name. We were like, you know what would make this something that people could connect to even more? And we started off on this process of trying to figure out what her name was. It was fairly simple. It grounded it. People who were talking with us, and when we presented this paper originally in 2005, understood that, okay, that could be worth it, because you would be able to then connect with that individual by understanding their humanity through that very simple process of knowing who they were. And sometimes naming is, as we all know today, one of the most important points of any academic process. Any community building, any kind of engagement, outreach opportunity that you have is connecting and being able to know that. It doesn't make those without names less. It just allows us to connect and build a relationship with them more. And from there, it becomes even more important to see the humanity in individuals as part of a collective and a bit. How are we going to do that? Well, we had begun by asking some of our friends who were members of congregations in neighboring churches. We began by asking, okay, well, what kind of records would exist at the end of the 19th century? We hit obstacle after obstacle, less so because folks were interested, but more so because the documentary record was difficult to go ahead and to get beyond the superficial. So you would hear about, for instance, the census records that were burned. And so, okay, well, that was one area that was kind of cut off, although we knew that there was enough census records that survived that maybe we could go ahead and look at that database as one way of engaging with and trying to find their name. Conversely, we started looking at land ownership. We did the trace for Fairfield. We understood, okay, this was never owned by people of African American descent. But we also knew that it wasn't lived in by people who were of European descent for its entire history. We knew that that last group of folks who were living there, especially that woman sitting on that piano stool, whether she had a family with her or it was solo just by herself, we knew that she was a tenant. And it made it even more difficult for us to like, okay, well then how are we going to find this out? Anyone who's done genealogy before knows that sometimes when one door closes, another door opens. Especially if you have success finding one needle in the haystack, you have this desire to go ahead and find the rest of them, because there's got to be more needles in that haystack, no matter how crazy that sounds. We thought that the first thing we could do is to start by looking at a bigger area and then to shrink it down. So what you see on the screen is what we call our initial study area. It's a 300-acre area that we would encompass not only the main core of Fairfield, so we knew our board of directors would be supportive of it, but then also included a wide array of different parcels that were divided off and that we knew already through just a little bit of research had people who owned them during the period of after the Civil War who were African American. And so we would say, okay, well, let's look at it more completely. Let's not look at it anecdotally. Let's almost look at it systematically. We also knew that there was not going to be the benefit of what you see behind you. We had gone through enough of the neighborhood to know finding physical evidence like this was going to be most likely out of the realm of possibility for us. This is a quarter, very simple one from early to mid 19th century, and one that we envisioned would be kind of like a guide. This is not in Gloucester, but it gives you a touchstone for what we were thinking about, because it wasn't about finding the 18th century evidence of slavery. It wasn't thinking about trying to find the first slaves that were part of that plantation. It was about the entirety of the history, and that would begin with this woman's name, but we knew that by doing something large, they would open up so many additional doors along the way. So what I'm about to show you is an early form of geographic information systems. This is basically maps with data that you can ask questions. And so you can type in your question after you have your data in your map, and out pops answers. Some of them very simple, some of them, like most questions, leading to more questions. So what you see on the screen are two archaeological sites. 44 Jail 24 is the Fairfield Plantation archaeological site. It incorporates the majority of that plantation's major structures, whereas 44 Jail 418, that is the Carter site. This was identified when they were starting to look at moving Route 614, which cuts along the northern edge of the property, and they understood that this was an African-American homestead starting in the post-emancipation period and moving all the way through until the 1940s. They even did more extensive excavations there when they knew that they would damage a portion of it before the road was built. So credit to some of our friends at the state who thought that yes, in the 1990s, it was important to look at African-American homes from the late 19th and early 20th century. It's been a dramatic change since that time. Now, almost everyone understands the significant value of it. But in the 90s and the 80s, it was a little hit or miss. Sometimes you had folks who just simply didn't think you could learn anything about the archaeology, about the past, through the archaeology of those things at that time. So we did as good historians would, as good archaeologists would, as good community-focused people would, in that we started pulling from all of these disparate sets to try to build up an information database that would then be useful to other people, and hopefully also act as a bit of a calling card as we began to start reaching out to other people in the community, particularly African-American community members. It's been one of our philosophies that when you engage with communities, particularly descendant communities, you need to come in with something, but it needs to be valuable. It needs to show that you are interested without saying that you are shoving this down people's throats or that you are asking for a rubber stamp at the end of the review. What you're looking to do is to demonstrate you are willing to put in some blood, sweat, and tears to research something that they might also find very important, and that you can abandon certain biases and questions as you learn so that you can then pivot and then look at a collective understanding, something that benefits the larger group and not just the idea you came in with. That idea might be great, but it's so much more powerful if it's part of a community idea, something that you can be a part of, hopefully more memorable and longer lasting. So then you get slides like this, which are inherently boring. Even my friends who deal with agricultural yields as a science, they say, yes, this is kind of a boring one.
Very boring.
Yes, they do. Thank you, my son. Because we had certain questions. We knew that there was these different themes that came up when we were learning about the history of not just the 18th century, but the 19th and 20th centuries, where you would start asking yourself, okay, how did people gain knowledge? How did people value land? And since we were going to be looking at land ownership and how land was divided up, we should probably start thinking about things like stories we would hear. Oh, well, the first land that was sold to African Americans after the Civil War, that was all of the worst land. That was a story that we would hear. At other times you would hear, well, especially from descendant community members, it's like, actually, they picked out the land that was the most important because no one knew the land better than the people who worked it every single day, generation upon generation. And there was a certain science behind it, not because you had a degree, but because of that experience level and that understanding of how things grew, because you were there year after year. You understood what to add, what to take away, when it was bad by circumstance and when it was good by intent. We had these wonderful opportunities to use records that we hadn't played with. This is the 1937 aerial image. It could at least tell us simple things like the difference between forested acreage and open acreage. That open acreage lent itself so much more to understanding it as large-scale agricultural processes. Well, does that mean this is part of a collective? Does this mean that it's actually the whole acreage that they were working on? Is there a collective group of different property owners who farmed, even though they owned specific slices, but they, in this case, owned and, worked them collectively to the greater good? We don't know. We know that this exists in the past, but this is a great entry point to say, when do the tree lines make a difference when it separates parcel A from parcel B? And when are these kind of superfluous? You can use maps to then build up a visual that will help us understand. So what you see behind me is a refined image from what we found in 1937's area. So you can start to see the difference between the two. This is wholly superficial, meaning that there is a much, much deeper level of engagement here if you're adding on some of the advances that we've seen over the last 26 years. 21 years. And then we could come back to something very simple. All right, everybody, what did the place look like in this 300 acres in 1860? So this is before emancipation. Who owns what? Well, in this case, there are two owners. There's the one in the upper left-hand corner. That's a darker brown. Robert C. Robbins, he owns the mill. That's why that's there. The mill acreage around it is not really for agricultural purposes, but it does support the mill. And what we know in the 18th century is that there was a mill quarter. A group of enslaved people who were tasked with working either on the mill or just in the land adjacent to the mill. So it begs the question, because you don't typically need more than a couple of acres for the mill, and this is closer to, I think, 15 acres, just to give you a sense of scale. And then the Levitt family. The Levitt family had bought it from the Thurstons, who bought it from the Burrells, who were the original patentees. So you can see just a very quick and compacted connection there. What's most shocking, though, is just 20 years later. You see James Carey, you see Randall and Nancy Carter, you see the E.G. Booth estate. E.G. Booth estate is essentially Fairfield. That's the proper. But all of this subdivision of acreage all the way up to Route 614. So that's that curve that you see here. It's pretty arbitrary, but this road exists, as far as we can tell, from the mid-17th century until today. And so you can start to see the subdivision of land. W.A. Robbins, Achilles and Maria Johnson, Anthony Thornton. Some of you in the room have done genealogy in the area, or your families have lived in this area long enough that you remember these as relatives. You know that these are not just white property owners. In fact, as I'll show in a minute, most of them are black. You can see it further divided by 1900. You can see just this increase, and it's not just passing it on from father to son, or from one family member to the next generation. In this case, you do see intermarriage, and you do see a lot of new property owners coming in. It's an opportunity to look at their individual histories. This is another door that is open that you can choose to walk through. And through understanding with descendant community engagement, a lot of these are family members. There's a power to understanding their lives that lends a lot to what we see as the value of doing history, the value of doing archaeology. Without it, again, it's just colorful little pictures on the page. With it, you can understand why those things are connected. 1920, you can see more subdivision. And so as a quick summary, you can see all four of those together, just how much land gets subdivided. I don't think you'd be too shocked to hear that it hasn't changed a tremendous amount since 1920. There has been some limited subdivision since then, but for the most part, it stayed about what you see in that year. Not the same owners, but definitely the same carving out. We danced around and put a little bit of a different twist on it with the following series of maps. So the race of the parcel owners. There are two parcel owners at the time. Gray is for white people. This is what you see. Both owners are white. By 1880, the darker colored parcels are owned by African Americans. So we know, for instance, that the large Fairfield parcel is owned by white people, but they are not living there. By 1880, there is an ad in one of the only surviving issues of the Gloucester Mail that mentions that not only is Fairfield for rent, the house and the grounds that are surrounding it, but also that there are easy terms. You also see that the mill is not owned by whites, is owned by whites. The interview we did with one of the Carter family members suggested that not only was it white throughout its time, but also that the majority of operators of the mill were black, at least the ones that remembered that. Everything from making boats on the third floor of the mill to taking those boats and then rowing them all the way out to along Carter Creek and into the York River to harvest oysters and come back and sell them in the mill as well. So knowing that those associations existed, one could legitimately argue that this entire graphic should be black, because the majority of work, the majority of the people putting in their time, those who are invested most in this outside of tax payments and or legal ownership issues, are black. By 1900, you can see it again, it's largely black. A little bit more subdivision. The item is the small square in the upper right-hand corner is the first country store, at least the first one that has its own individual parcel. Again, owned by white people, most likely operated by black.
On silence.
Yes, well, they can read the slide, so this is where it doesn't require hearing me to go ahead and understand what I'm trying to get.
Well, I can't read the slide.
Well,
All the way over there.
it's true.
The letters are blowy. And that's even blowier.
We do need to get you glasses.
No, I just can't see them. The letters are too small.
No, I can see it clearly. I'm half blind. All right, moving on.
If you have contacts, you do it closer to it.
Thank you, Eric. This is
I
the
have a
mill.
point.
One of the points of fascination for us has been looking at these nodes of community interaction. We know that throughout Gloucester County, mills are areas where folks are needing to bring their material, process that material. There's this whole economic intersection there where people are also selling other goods there. They're using them as barter. You're seeing more than just money exchange hands, you're seeing products exchange hands. And when it takes a long time to mill things, you're seeing people stay. You're seeing people be in that location for a longer period. That builds a connection. In most cases, that builds a sense of understanding, of knowing each other, and in some cases, a sense of trust. Oftentimes, that's a lot of us projecting how we want to see the world into the past. But there is a certain inarguableness that these are essential community nodes, and that initial question is like, would this be a place where blacks and whites were interacting with each other? And how did those interactions then translate into changes in the community? That's a very good question to be asked. And from that point, maybe we will learn more. The sketches, this one done by a local artist, was in a fascinating moment to go ahead and envision what you might see if you were to walk into a country store. We included largely because we just want to talk about people again. And you look through a bunch of slides that had maps, which are cool, but then also a couple of charts, which are maybe not cool. No?
No.
You're agreement? Also not.
Sorry.
So back in '05, the last thing that we ended up trying to do, because we thought, okay, well, maybe this is the way that we'll find out her name, is we decided to pull the census records that predated. We started to look around and see if we could tie together the idea that property owners that would only be in the land tax records, and then residents of these parcels, we might be able to connect the two together in some useful fashion. And so we looked at the census records notes and the path that they took going from house to house. And so it was not a very successful try, but it gave us some interesting ideas to pull from, is that you can see when you have an owner-occupied parcel and when that name connected with the census records. And you would start to say, okay, well, I see this census person. Okay, that's the first person. Then where did they go next? Was that a neighbor? When did they start their day? When did they end their day? And did they start their next day in a different location? What it seemed to suggest, just to get to the point, is that in many of these cases, we had parcels that seemed to have multiple residents on them. So it was noticeable for census takers to go ahead and to walk to several different houses on the same parcel. or they're just dancing around and I've misinterpreted the entire exercise. A very possible situation, but if it is the census taker walking from point A to point B, there's always the chance they're knocking on a door and no one is home. And so they're just skipping it and maybe not recording it, maybe noting that they'll come back later. But on the off chance that we could have found where somebody lived, not based on the land that they owned, or some records that survived in personal papers, but by the census taker's path. Or maybe it would give us enough argument to say, this is a person we need to look into more deeply. Because if we could find these individuals who didn't connect directly with the land through paper, but by their very existence, by this other form of documentation, maybe it would give us a hint. Ultimately, we were looking for this person in the lower left-hand corner, and we hadn't researched the properties to the south. So maybe it would work if we went and did the acreage to the south, and then did the opposite with the census taker, but that's a story for next time. The last thing was that we then experienced this moment where we were like, wait, we don't have her name, but now we know all of these people. We have this long list of people who are interested in figuring out what their lives were like. Instead of a story about a single woman who is sitting on a piano stool and feeding corn cobs into a stove, now we have Achilles Johnson, which the name has stuck with me ever since we read it. That moment where you're trying to figure out what the word means because the handwriting is not something you're familiar with. And then you realize it in fact does say Achilles, and then you now know that for the rest of your life. You know, we started looking and asking ourselves, okay, well, which properties had buildings on them? Maybe we could just start looking at the evidence and see where it goes. We looked at soil quality. We started finding out a few other little stories that helped illustrate the value of doing a project like this. And I want to illustrate one, and that'll conclude what I'm talking about for this moment, for a little bit of description of where we want to go next. But I think you can see the cursor, and it's right here.
I cannot see it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's non-existent.
So rough. All right, it's directly above my finger. You can see essentially this weird parcel in blue that has a little knob at the end. And that knob has a little bit of higher quality soil right at the end of it. And that knob, I'm trying to get to the point where it gets subdivided off. Sorry, it's in a previous slide, is cut off in the end of the 19th century, and it is owned by a single African-American woman. She's the owner. So it's not a family, and she is in her 80s. And so she has purchased that parcel specifically, whether it was because that's what her family lived before, or if maybe that was where she knew, by and large, so exactly what she needed. Perhaps it was simply this act that she had enough money to go ahead and to buy her own land in her own name as an act of establishing herself for history. It became this important little blip where it seemed like that story was worth researching. That story was someone who would be speaking to us, if only to remind us of the adventure that these people went through, the accomplishments that they made, so that they would not be forgotten. So, what we hope to do in the future is to expand a study like this because it brings more names to the forefront. Secondly, those names and that information should not be behind some kind of, what do they call it, barrier to access. How do you get this out more? Well, we've been lucky enough to go ahead and work with the Family Circle, who have made this largely through Sarah Lewis's efforts because her interest in genealogy and working with us for as long as she has, to go ahead and to say, well, I've got some files that they did in the past, let me get to. She's become a conveyor of some of the research we've done, not only adding to that research, but then just making sure that it's not forgotten that it exists. And that is a hard process because it means going to meetings, talking with people, learning about what their interests are, and starting to connect dots and to help people without necessarily saying, this is something I did. It was more about, how can I help you with what you're doing? Those moments for us are extremely important because we want to go ahead and to make a difference. We want to go ahead and to expand what we do to understand. It's informed us when we look at the larger archaeological district that we hope at some point in the future to create, something that doesn't have to be done now, but should be done over time when you engage with people and explain that maybe there would be a benefit to this. Or we just use that North Star to go ahead and to justify spending more time and resources to help people who are interested in learning more and to be a better servant to our communities. Sometimes if you want to do a project, you have to find those funds, and those funds can satisfy some other. But ultimately, our main goal is to infuse this area with the kind of knowledge and understanding that the people are interested in learning about. So while we wish to work with churches, we wish to work with landscapes, we wish to work with understanding and protecting the places where our ancestors and those who are around us are buried. I'm a come here to the nth degree. I'm an Air Force brat who has no connection to the area outside of being around for a while. I care very deeply for the burial places that are for all of us. And so finding them, which we wish we could do more easily, but also then memorializing them, preserving and protecting them, that's something that is well worth our time. So I'll end our research at that point. Say that we are very interested in working with the community to develop more and new research questions beyond those that I've listed. But I know that it would be just an amazing amount of fun, an exciting moment to go ahead and to work with people to learn more about the things that they care about. And so thank you for your time.
We've had some wonderful presentations, haven't we? So tonight is not a very long night. We are going to have a praise dance by Pastor Rochelle Palin to original music by our worship leader, Watson. Are you singing? No, it's Watson. He's going to play some music, and Rochelle is going to praise dance. And then I'm going to introduce, I'm going to share an announcement, because like I said, our congregation is actually watching some broadcast. Usually we have our worship gatherings happening throughout the weekend elsewhere when we have our Antioch homecoming, but this year we canceled our weekend worship gathering, so everybody's watching online. So I'll share some announcements for you guys, and also for those who are connected to the ministry after Rochelle dances, and then I'm going to lead us at the beginning of our healing circle and in the broadcast, and then we'll actually interact with each other, those of us who are in the room. And so I'm going to turn it over to the worshipers. we are coming to a close for this evening, and I want to invite you to join us tomorrow. So throughout the years, we've been collecting oral histories, but I think we've come to a place we don't have any more we need to collect this year. Our historians are here, but we've been collecting for a few years now. They're being archived in William and Mary, and so tomorrow we will start at 2 p.m. From 2 p.m. to 5 p.m. We'll be right here in Antioch. For those of you who are online, you can go to antiochgloucester.org to learn more or to join us on Zoom. We are going to broadcast as well. And so I'll welcome us and start with a centering activity similar to one that we do in the family circle. And then also we're going to talk about oral history. So we'll have Daryl Kuba, who's going to be joining us. He's here live. He's a Gloucester native. Then we're also going to have Jessica Taylor join us online, and she was doing some of the oral histories in the past. We're going to hear songs from the Woodfield Rosenwald School Descendants Choir, because that's the work that's happening where descendants of enslavers and descendants of the enslaved have been coming together. Sarah Lewis has been just tremendously amazing in helping to bring that together. And so I'm excited about that. And so we're going to hear some of the songs that they sang at some of the dedication events that we've had, as Fairfield Foundation has created some structures to cause us to remember the enslaved on the foundations, on the plantations that the foundation is now stewarding. And then we can hear from Sam Carter Shamai, who is also a Gloucester native, but he is in Canada. He came all the way back down here, just like Daryl came all the way back from the UK. They came back home for homecoming. So, they are professionals in this field, and we are just blessed that you come back here and they bless us, not just, when they're physically here, but they join us online. They're just sharing their expertise in history. And so Sam is going to share a project that he's been creating that's going to really help, minister to our hearts and connect people across miles and history. And so we're excited to hear more about that. And then we are going to bless the Ancestor Trail that is going to be created by Fairfield Foundation with, on some of the plantation land that they own, which is right across from Antioch. And so we'll be here in Antioch. We'll look at, maps of it, what's going to be happening there, and we'll really just kind of bless it from here. As Antioch will be a place where people can come, learn about it, park their cars, and then go and walk through the trail. And so I'm excited about that. Pastor Rochelle, Elderson Mees, Watson, Michelle, Mr. Keita, they steward Antioch. I'm often in Richmond. We have another congregation up there, but they're stewards and they're here throughout the week. And so I'm excited about them connecting with you guys in Fairfield Foundation, because this is a long-term relationship, so we can do things that are a blessing to the community. Now, we don't just do this work. We actually have work that we're doing abroad as well. Next month, I'm going to Ghana and Kenya, and we are creating sustainable projects for orphanages, schools, ministries, and communities, farms, all types of things to sustain different organizations and groups in some of the more challenged areas in Ghana and Kenya. And so we're excited about that. You can learn more at truthservices.org, and you can actually join us as we are planning to sow into projects that are happening there, put some things on the ground there. And so if you're interested, there is more information on the table back there for you online. Just go to truthservices.org. Everything is there, so even information about Antioch is there. You can always go to antiochgloucester.org for specific information about what's happening here in Antioch. Lastly, I want to share with you guys that we will not be here next weekend. Next Saturday is the 4th of July. Now, we tend to have our services on Saturdays, as we have Shabbat services, but we're going to be online only, so we won't be physically here in Antioch. So if you guys are still in town, we won't be physically here, but we will be online, because I will be broadcasting from the Museum of the Bible, where there's another Rededicate 250 event happening. A lot of leaders from out the nation are coming together, because we're doing amazing reconciliation work here in Gloucester. I was actually on a podcast talking about that this afternoon. But this is something that needs to happen all over the nation. And so we've got to make those nationwide connections because people are hurting and they need healing. And the truth is, we've got a wonderful model right here. And so I'm excited to connect with people in other parts of the nation and kind of connect and share with them this model that is being established here and other things that are happening throughout the nation. We want to make some connections so we really can continue this work of healing and reconciliation that our whole nation needs. And so again, truthservices.org, where you can find out more, We've actually started the invitation movement, where we've accepted God's invitation to meet him where he is working, to turn this nation back to himself, one city at a time, through healing, peace, and justice. And that is a nationwide movement where we're bringing people together in healing circles, like the one we're gonna have tonight, peace strategies to really learn to live together in their community, and the family circle would really be, that's a peace strategy. And then justice acts, where we can deal with legislation, because some of it may have been well-intentioned, but did some harm. You know, people losing funding for very good projects over language and legislation, that means that we need to be at the tables where legislation is being written. That's really important, so that people see where, how this actually plays out in the lives of individuals. And so when we can come to the table and have those conversations, we make a difference, a lasting difference in our nation. So I'm excited that you guys are here. For more about what I just shared, go to invitationmbmt.org. Again, it's at truthservices.org. Everything is there. But I wanted to share those announcements with you all. And now I'm going to close this out with benediction, a brief word of prayer, but then I'm going to go into the beginning of our healing circle activity and encourage you guys to continue on. We're going to continue on here. Encourage you guys to continue on at home. So if you'll join me for a word of prayer, and then we'll go into our activity. And so, Father, we just thank you for all the work that's been done, all the people who contribute, each person sacrificing, each person opening their home, their heart, being vulnerable, people sharing their stories, looking at history from various angles so that we can all connect even more. We know it brings healing, and we know that blesses you. Help us to be even more of a blessing to you and to each other as we come together in a community. We thank you for that, and we bless you for that. Hashem Yeshua HaMashiach. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. And so, as Sarah was talking about the churches and equity, diversity, equity, inclusion, we want to really think about inclusion individually, not just as a society, but as people. When you talk about those type of words, they've been thrown out kind of in a societal, legislative way, but they're very personal. They're very personal. And so I want to encourage each one of you to take a moment, close your eyes, and to think about a time when you felt excluded from something. Why do you believe you were excluded? Did anyone share why they thought you should be excluded? Or were you just left with your own emotions and perceptions? Did you see in any way that it's possible that you were excluded because they were trying to set healthy boundaries? Or were you excluded because someone prejudged you and didn't think that you should be a part of what was happening? Now consider your own experience with exclusion. All of us have felt it. From that place, what are you willing to do to contribute to the conversation of inclusion? As we look at history, Sarah showed us photos of African Americans who had to sit in the back, at the top, even outside, excluded from the assembly of God. We know this happened even in education. African Americans not able to get the same education. So what happens later? Black churches are created. Historically, black colleges and universities are created. And some people say today, we're all equal now. Do we even still need things like that? Let's come together. How do we come together? And what should we preserve for history's sake? What still needs to be preserved, because populations aren't getting everything others are getting. and what needs to be included. Don't just look at this from the eyes of a member of society. Remember your feeling of exclusion. And I would encourage you to come back to the room and open your eyes and realize that everyone else in this room at some point has felt excluded as well. Doesn't matter what group they're in, doesn't matter their background, everyone has felt it. So now as we come together, what can we say to each other? What can we share to really look at this topic of inclusion and decide as a community how we want to address it? So those of you who are on Zoom or you're watching the broadcast, I want to encourage you not to move away from this moment too quickly. Pause, maybe journal about what you remembered, what you felt. And if you have ideas, if you've got things you'd like to share them with people around you. I challenge you to find people who are not a part of your demographic and ask if they'd be willing to have a heart-to-heart. Because I guarantee you'll hear something you didn't expect to hear. So I want to thank you guys online for joining us. We are going to stop the broadcast and close out the Zoom now. And for those of you who are in the room, I want to invite you to bring your chairs up here because we're going to have a physical circle while we move into our healing circle. Thank you so much. Yes, ma'am.
So as we've had wonderful presentations here,
Oh, could you come up? Because we're still broadcasting, and they're going to be like, what did she say? Who is that from?
hi, I'm Nancy Rubin, and I'm with the Fairfield Foundation. And one of the things that I had thought about to help us to have a connection in this time that we are working through in our communities is a window of history that we have a tangible moment. And as far as tangibility, Fairfield has had the wonderful privilege of finding a subfloor pit from an enslaved structure at Fairfield. And in the back are artifacts from that subfloor pit that those enslaved people felt important enough to preserve under the floor of their cabin. And so I encourage you to go and look at those artifacts and be able to see and have a tangible moment in that time of history of those people that you may be connected to.
Thank you so
Thank you,
much.
Nancy.